guys, tonight we begin with something small, just a little bedtime story about a tiny village on the banks of a river that somehow became the most powerful empire in the Western world for centuries, and then, of course, collapsed in a spectacularly messy way, because history loves a good and then it all fell apart ending. So, dim the lights, get comfortable, maybe make some tea, and let's drift back to a time when Italy wasn't a country, Julius Caesar wasn't a salad, and the word Roman didn't yet mean we conquered you, pay your taxes. We start, as all good bedtime histories do, with a myth. Rome's origin story is one of those tales that's about 10% plausible and 90% sure, why not? According to legend, the city was founded in 753 BCE by twin brothers, Romulus and Remus. They were supposedly the sons of Mars, the god of war, and a mortal woman named Rhea Silvia, because apparently, in ancient myths, gods just couldn't resist meddling in human affairs. And by meddling, I mean fathering children and then abandoning them. The twins were abandoned at birth, placed in a basket, and floated down the Tiber River, because nothing says good parenting like sending your newborns on a river cruise without supervision. They were rescued and suckled by a she-wolf, which sounds dramatic, but in Latin, lupa could also mean prostitute. So maybe it was less National Geographic and more kindly woman who took them in. Either way, they survived, grew up, and eventually decided to found a city. And here's where sibling rivalry kicked in. Romulus killed Remus in an argument, allegedly over where to put the city walls, and named the city after himself. Because if you're going to commit fratricide, you might as well get some branding out of it. Now, whether or not any of that happened is questionable, but the Romans loved this story. It gave them a sense of destiny. They weren't just another Italian tribe. They were children of the god of war, born from drama and destined for greatness, and also, apparently, destined for a long history of political murders. In reality, early Rome was probably just one of many small settlements in central Italy. It was surrounded by other tribes, the Latins, the Sabines, the Etruscans. The Etruscans in particular were more advanced at the time. They had cities, kings, and a taste for elaborate tombs. Rome, in its early days, borrowed heavily from them: architecture, religious rituals, even the idea of gladiatorial games. So yes, the Romans were already good at one thing: cultural appropriation. For its first couple of centuries, Rome was ruled by kings, 7 of them, according to tradition. Some were probably real, others less so. The last one, Tarquin the Proud, was overthrown around 509 BCE, after his son committed a particularly nasty crime against a noblewoman named Lucretia. Her subsequent suicide sparked outrage, and the Romans decided they'd had enough of kings. They replaced the monarchy with a republic, which, in theory, meant power was shared among elected officials. In practice, it meant power was shared among a small group of wealthy families who all thought they were better than everyone else. So, basically, politics as usual. The Roman Republic was a complicated machine. You had 2 consuls at the top, elected annually, who were supposed to keep each other in check. You had the Senate, made up of aristocrats who gave advice, which was really more like instructions you'd better follow. And you had popular assemblies, where ordinary citizens could vote, but only if they were male, free, and not too poor. So, again, democracy in the loosest possible sense. But here's the thing, the system worked, at least for a while. Rome started expanding, first across the Italian peninsula, then beyond. They were relentless. If they conquered you, they might make you a citizen, or at least an ally. They built roads, aqueducts, and fortifications, and they had a knack for absorbing the best parts of other cultures: Greek art, Etruscan engineering, Carthaginian naval tactics, and making them Roman. Speaking of Carthage, let's float over to one of Rome's most famous rivalries. Carthage was a wealthy city-state in North Africa, founded by Phoenician traders. They controlled trade across the Mediterranean, and they were not thrilled about Rome muscling in. This led to the Punic Wars, 3 of them, spread over more than a century. The Second Punic War gave us one of history's most famous overachievers, Hannibal Barca. He marched an army, complete with war elephants, over the Alps to attack Rome from the north. Because apparently, surprise in ancient warfare meant do something so insane your enemy thinks you've lost your mind. Hannibal won several battles, but Rome refused to surrender. Eventually, they took the fight to Carthage itself, forcing Hannibal to rush home and defend it. Carthage lost, and Rome became the dominant power in the western Mediterranean. By the end of the Third Punic War, Rome had had enough of Carthage. They destroyed the city in 146 BCE, allegedly sowing the ground with salt so nothing would grow there again. Which is probably a myth, but it's the kind of petty detail historians love to repeat. Now, here's where things start to get messy. Rome's expansion brought wealth, and with it, inequality. The rich got richer, buying up land and using slaves to work it. Small farmers were pushed out, moving to the city in search of work. The political system, designed for a small city-state, started to buckle under the weight of an empire. Enter the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius. They were aristocrats who actually cared about the poor, which made them deeply unpopular with other aristocrats. They tried to pass land reforms, redistribute wealth, and generally make life less miserable for ordinary Romans. The Senate responded by having them both killed, because nothing says healthy democracy like murdering reformers. From there, the Republic slid into a cycle of political violence. Generals like Marius and Sulla used their armies to seize power. Civil wars became a recurring theme, and then came Julius Caesar, ambitious, charismatic, and very aware of his own greatness. Caesar conquered Gaul, wrote about it in a way that made himself look brilliant, and then marched his army into Rome in 49 BCE, crossing the Rubicon River in open defiance of the Senate. This sparked another civil war, which Caesar won. He declared himself dictator for life, which historically is a title that tends to shorten your life. Sure enough, in 44 BCE, a group of senators stabbed him to death in the theater of Pompey. They claimed they were saving the Republic. Instead, they plunged it into yet another round of civil wars. Out of that chaos emerged Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian, later known as Augustus. He was clever, patient, and much better at PR than his rivals. By 27 BCE, he had outmaneuvered everyone and become Rome's first emperor. Officially, the Republic still existed. In reality, Augustus held all the power. He just made it look like he didn't, which is a political skill many leaders could learn from. Under Augustus, Rome entered a period of relative peace, known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. It lasted about 2 centuries, give or take. The empire expanded to its greatest extent, stretching from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. Roads, aqueducts, and monumental buildings sprang up everywhere. Roman law and culture spread across the Mediterranean world. But of course, peace didn't mean the emperors were all stable, competent, or even remotely normal. Some were brilliant administrators. Others, well, let's just say they kept the gossip mill turning. Tiberius, Augustus's successor, retreated to the island of Capri and allegedly indulged in all sorts of questionable hobbies. Caligula, his successor, is remembered for extravagance, cruelty, and possibly making his horse a priest. Though, to be fair, the horse probably had more sense than half the Senate. And then there was Nero, famous for supposedly fiddling while Rome burned in 64 CE. He probably didn't actually play the fiddle, it hadn't been invented yet, but he did use the fire as an excuse.
The empire at its peak and the cracks begin. So Nero, the guy who supposedly fiddled while Rome burned in 64 CE, now the fiddle didn't exist yet, so he probably played the lyre, which is basically a harp for people who like to sit down. And whether he actually played music during the fire is debatable. Ancient historians loved a bit of character assassination, and Nero made it easy for them. What we do know is that after the fire, he used large chunks of the burned city to build himself a massive palace, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. It had gardens, fountains, and a rotating dining room. Because when your city is in ruins, the obvious solution is to build a giant revolving restaurant for yourself. Nero's reign ended the way a lot of unpopular emperors' reigns ended, with rebellion. Facing revolt from multiple provinces, he fled Rome and eventually committed suicide in 68 CE. His last words were supposedly, "What an artist dies in me," which is not exactly the humble exit line you'd expect from someone whose empire was falling apart. Nero's death plunged Rome into what historians politely call a period of instability and what normal people would call a complete mess. In the year 69 CE, 4 different men claimed the throne in quick succession: Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian. It was basically the imperial version of musical chairs, except the chair was a throne and everyone was armed. Vespasian managed to hold on to power and founded the Flavian dynasty. He was a practical man, less interested in golden palaces, more interested in rebuilding the city and filling the treasury. He also started construction on the Colosseum, which was basically Rome's version of a sports stadium, except instead of football games, you got gladiators fighting to the death, and occasionally exotic animals mauling people. Fun for the whole family. After the Flavians came the so-called 5 good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. Historians love this period because, for once, the emperors weren't complete disasters. Trajan expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent, conquering Dacia, modern-day Romania, and bringing back so much gold that Rome could fund public works for years. Hadrian, on the other hand, decided the empire was big enough and focused on consolidating it. He built Hadrian's Wall in Britain, which was less about keeping out barbarians and more about saying, "This is the edge, we're done here." Marcus Aurelius is remembered as the philosopher emperor, writing his meditations while dealing with wars on the frontiers and a devastating plague. He was wise, thoughtful, and, unfortunately, left the empire to his son Commodus, which was a bit like handing over a well-tuned sports car to someone who thinks the brakes are optional. Commodus fancied himself a gladiator and liked to fight in the arena, though, of course, his opponents were carefully chosen to make sure he won. He renamed Rome after himself, which is always a sign of modesty. Eventually, he was assassinated in 192 CE, and once again, the empire descended into chaos. The 3rd century was not Rome's best look. Historians call it the crisis of the 3rd century, which is putting it mildly. In the space of 50 years, Rome had over 20 emperors, most of whom died violently.
The empire was invaded by external enemies, torn apart by internal rebellions, and hit by economic collapse. It was like the universe decided to see how many disasters it could stack at once. One man who managed to pull things back together, at least temporarily, was Diocletian. He came to power in 284 CE and decided the empire was too big for one man to rule, so he split it in 2, creating the Eastern and Western Roman empires, each with its own emperor. He also introduced a system called the Tetrarchy, 4 rulers sharing power. In theory, it was brilliant. In practice, it was like having 4 cooks in the kitchen, each convinced their recipe was the best. Diocletian also tried to fix the economy by issuing price controls, which went about as well as you'd expect. But he did something unusual for a Roman emperor. He retired. He went off to grow cabbages in his villa in Dalmatia, and when asked to return to power, he basically said, "No thanks, I'm busy with my vegetables," which, honestly, might be the most relatable thing any emperor ever did. After Diocletian, the empire slid back into civil war until Constantine the Great emerged as the sole ruler in 324 CE. Constantine is famous for 2 things: legalizing Christianity and founding a new capital, Constantinople, on the site of the old Greek city of Byzantium. It was strategically located, wealthy, and much easier to defend than Rome, which in hindsight was a smart move because Rome itself was becoming increasingly vulnerable. By the late 4th century, the Western Empire was under constant pressure from migrating and invading peoples: Goths, Vandals, Huns. The Battle of Adrianople in 378 CE was a turning point where the Eastern Roman army was crushed by the Goths. It showed that Rome was no longer invincible. And then came the 5th century, the slow-motion car crash of the Western Empire. In 410 CE, Rome was sacked by the the Visigoths under Alaric. It was the first time the city had fallen to a foreign enemy in nearly 800 years, and it shocked the Roman world. The Vandals followed in 455 CE, and by 476 CE, the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer. The Eastern Empire, now known as the Byzantine Empire, carried on for another 1,000 years, but the Western Roman Empire was gone. And that, in the most relaxed possible way, is how a small settlement on the Tiber grew into a vast empire, and then unraveled, not with a single dramatic collapse, but with a long, slow decline. The kind that makes you wonder if anyone noticed it happening at the time, or if they were too busy arguing in the Senate about whose cousin should be consul next year.
Rome's most dysfunctional emperors. Let's float back to where we left off. The Western Empire is wobbling, the Eastern Empire is holding on, and in between, we've had a parade of emperors who could generously be described as eccentric, or less generously, walking cautionary tales. We'll start with Caligula, because why not begin with the man whose name has become shorthand for absolute power plus zero impulse control. Born Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, he got the nickname Caligula, meaning little boots, as a child because he wore a miniature soldier's outfit while accompanying his father on campaigns. It was cute then. It was less cute when he grew up and started treating the empire like his personal playground. Caligula began his reign in 37 CE with promise. He was young, popular, and the people hoped for a fresh start after the gloomy Tiberius years. Then, a few months in, he fell seriously ill. When he recovered, something seemed different. Ancient sources claim he became paranoid, cruel, and extravagantly wasteful. He supposedly declared himself a living god, built a floating palace on ships, and yes, the famous story, tried to make his horse Incitatus a consul. Was that true? Maybe. Or maybe it was just a very pointed insult from senators who hated him. Either way, it's the kind of detail that sticks. By 41 CE, the Praetorian Guard had had enough. They assassinated him in a palace corridor, ending a reign that lasted less than 4 years but left enough gossip to last centuries. Next, let's drift over to Nero again, because he deserves more than the brief mention we gave him earlier. Nero came to power in 54 CE at the age of 16 thanks to his mother Agrippina the Younger, who had married Emperor Claudius and then, allegedly, poisoned him. Nero started off under the guidance of the philosopher Seneca, which sounds promising. But as he grew older, he became more interested in performing arts than governing. He sang, acted, and played music in public, which horrified the Roman elite, because respectable Romans did not perform on stage. That was for slaves and professionals, not emperors. Then came the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE. Whether or not Nero started it, he certainly took advantage of it, building his massive golden house on the cleared land. He also blamed the Christians for the fire, leading to brutal persecutions. By 68 CE, revolts were breaking out, and Nero fled the city. Facing capture, he killed himself, reportedly saying, "What an artist dies in me," which, if nothing else, was on brand. Now, let's glide forward to Commodus, the man who thought he was Hercules reincarnated. Son of the philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius, Commodus inherited the throne in 180 CE. He quickly abandoned his father's careful governance in favor of self-indulgence. He fought in the Colosseum, but only against opponents who posed no real threat.
He renamed Rome Colonia Commodiana and the months of the year after his own titles. It was less emperor and more self-obsessed influencer with an army. Eventually, his erratic behavior alienated everyone around him. In 192 CE, he was strangled in his bath by a wrestler named Narcissus, which is poetic given Commodus's love of his own reflection. And then there's Elagabalus, a teenager who became emperor in 218 CE and treated the role like an avant-garde art project. He was high priest of the sun god Elagabal before becoming emperor, and he tried to make his god the chief deity of Rome. He married multiple times, including to a Vestal virgin, which was a huge religious scandal. He also hosted lavish banquets where guests were served dishes made entirely of peas or beans just to see what would happen. It was a vibe. The Praetorian Guard eventually tired of his eccentricities and killed him in 222 CE, dumping his body in the Tiber. Rome moved on, but his reign remained one of the strangest footnotes in imperial history. Of course, not all dysfunctional emperors were flamboyant. Some were just catastrophically bad at their jobs. Take Honorius, who ruled the Western Empire from 393 to 423 CE. When Rome was sacked by the Visigoths in 410 CE, he reportedly thought someone was telling him his pet chicken, also named Rome, had died. When he learned it was the city, he was relieved his chicken was fine. Is that story true? Probably not. But it's exactly the kind of thing people believed about him, which says a lot. By the time the Western Empire collapsed in 476 CE, the imperial title had been worn by men who were brilliant, mediocre, delusional, or just unlucky. Some expanded the empire's borders, others shrank its dignity, and through it all, Rome endured, not as a political power, but as an idea.
The Byzantines, Rome's glittering, bickering ghost. So, the Western Empire is gone. The Senate in Rome is basically a historical cosplay club now. But in the East, in the city of Constantinople, the Roman Empire is still very much alive, or at least still insisting it is. They called themselves Romans, not Byzantines. Byzantine is a label later historians slapped on them, probably because it's easier than saying Eastern Roman Empire every time. Constantinople was a jewel of a city, strategically perched between Europe and Asia, surrounded by massive walls and dripping with wealth from trade. It had palaces, churches, and a hippodrome for chariot racing, which doubled as a venue for political riots. Because nothing says civic engagement like throwing rocks at your emperor between laps. Let's start with Justinian I, who ruled from 527 to 565 CE. He's remembered as one of the great Byzantine emperors, ambitious, tireless, and slightly obsessed with restoring the old Roman Empire. He reconquered parts of Italy, North Africa, and Spain, which sounds impressive until you remember that holding on to them was tricky. Wars are expensive, and the treasury was not bottomless. Justinian also oversaw the creation of the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law, which became the foundation for much of European legal tradition. So, yes, he was a workaholic, but he also had a knack for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. In 532 CE, the Nika riots broke out in Constantinople, a massive uprising sparked by chariot racing factions. It escalated into a full-blown revolt, with much of the city burned. Justinian was ready to flee, but his wife Theodora famously told him that royal purple makes a fine burial shroud. Translation, "We're not running, you're the emperor, act like it." He stayed, crushed the revolt, and rebuilt the city, including the Hagia Sophia, which still stands today. After Justinian, the empire had its ups and downs. Sometimes it was rich and powerful, sometimes it was broke and under siege. And sometimes it was both at once, because Byzantium had a talent for multitasking disasters. Take Heraclius, who came to power in 610 CE. He spent years fighting the Persians, finally defeating them in 628 CE. Victory celebrations were short-lived, because almost immediately Arab armies swept out of the Arabian Peninsula, fueled by the rise of Islam. Within a few decades, Byzantium lost Egypt, Syria, and much of North Africa. Heraclius went from savior of the empire to the guy who presided over its biggest territorial losses. History can be cruel like that. And then there's the whole business of Byzantine court politics. If you think Roman senators were backstabby, the Byzantine palace made them look like amateurs. Intrigue was an art form. Emperors were blinded, exiled, or quietly retired to monasteries. Sometimes they came back for a sequel reign, because apparently Constantinople didn't believe in final exits. One of the more colorful rulers was Basil II, nicknamed the Bulgar Slayer. He ruled for nearly 50 years, from 976 to 1025 CE, and spent much of that time at war. He was a tough, no-nonsense emperor who didn't care much for luxury. When he died, the empire was at its height, wealthy, secure, and respected. Naturally, his successors managed to squander that within a few decades. By the 11th century, the Byzantines were facing a new problem: the Seljuk Turks. The disastrous Battle of Manzikert in 1071 CE saw much of Anatolia, the empire's heartland, fall into Turkish hands. This was a blow they never fully recovered from. In desperation, the emperor Alexius I Komnenos called for help from Western Europe, which led to the Crusades. Now, the Crusades were supposed to be about reclaiming the Holy Land, but in 1204 CE, the Fourth Crusade decided to take a detour and sack Constantinople instead. Yes, Christian crusaders looted a Christian city. They stole relics, treasures, and anything not nailed down. The empire was carved up, and for the next few decades, Constantinople was ruled by a so-called Latin Empire that was basically a looting operation with a throne. The Byzantines eventually took their city back in 1261 CE, but the damage was done. The empire was a shadow of its former self, smaller, poorer, and surrounded by enemies. Still, it limped along for another 2 centuries, because if Byzantium had one superpower, it was refusing to die on schedule. Finally, in 1453 CE, the Ottoman Turks, led by Mehmed II, laid siege to Constantinople. The city's massive walls had repelled attackers for centuries. But this time, the Ottomans had gunpowder artillery. After weeks of bombardment, the walls were breached. The last emperor, Constantine XI, is said to have thrown off his imperial regalia and charged into the fighting, disappearing into legend. And with that, the Roman Empire, in any form, was gone. The Byzantines left behind a legacy of art, architecture, and bureaucracy so complex that Byzantine is now a synonym for needlessly complicated. They preserved ancient Greek and Roman knowledge, influenced Orthodox Christianity, and kept the idea of Rome alive long after the original city had fallen. And they did it all while bickering, scheming, and occasionally blinding each other.
The odd habits of emperors. Let's start with Tiberius, the reluctant emperor who succeeded Augustus. Tiberius didn't actually want the job. He was more of a moody introvert than a charismatic leader, and after a few years in Rome, he decided he'd had enough of the capital's politics. So he moved to the island of Capri and basically ruled the empire by letter. Capri was beautiful, sunny, and far away from the Senate, which was exactly the point. Ancient gossip claimed he filled his villa with all sorts of scandalous entertainments. But given how much Roman historians loved to smear on popular emperors, it's hard to know what's true. What is true is that he stayed there for the last decade of his reign, leaving Rome to stew in rumors. Then there's Claudius, who came to power after Caligula's assassination. Claudius was physically disabled and had a stammer, which led many to underestimate him. He turned out to be a capable administrator, but he also had a soft spot for dice games. He even wrote a book on how to play, because apparently running an empire still left time for board game theory. Claudius also had a habit of marrying women who were,
let's say, ambitious. His third wife, Messalina, was notorious for her affairs, and his fourth, Agrippina the Younger, may have poisoned him to put her son Nero on the throne. So, not the most relaxing domestic life. Speaking of Nero, we've already covered his artistic ambitions, but let's linger on them. Nero didn't just dabble in music, he was obsessed with performing. He forced senators to sit through his recitals, which could last for hours. Leaving early was not an option. Some people reportedly pretended to faint just to be carried out. Others, well, let's just say there were rumors of more permanent exits. Nero also competed in the Olympic Games in Greece, and, shockingly, won every event he entered, even the ones he didn't finish. It's amazing what you can achieve when you're the judge, the sponsor, and the emperor. Now, let's drift over to Hadrian, the emperor who built that famous wall in Britain. Hadrian was a restless traveler. He spent more time touring the provinces than sitting in Rome, inspecting fortifications, commissioning buildings, and generally making sure everyone knew the emperor might drop by unannounced. He also had a deep love for Greek culture, so much so that he grew a beard in the Greek style, starting a trend among Roman men. Before Hadrian, emperors were clean-shaven. After Hadrian, beards were in. So yes, he basically changed imperial fashion with his face. Caracalla deserves a mention for his approach to public relations. In 212 CE, he granted Roman citizenship to nearly every free man in the empire. This sounds generous, but it also meant more people had to pay certain taxes. Caracalla was also known for building the massive Baths of Caracalla in Rome, a public complex with hot rooms, cold rooms, swimming pools, and gardens. It was a great way to win popularity until he had his brother Geta murdered in their mother's arms. Family dinners were probably awkward after that. And then there's Elagabalus again, because his quirks deserve their own spotlight. He loved lavish banquets, but not in the usual too much wine way. He once served a dinner where every dish was made from a single ingredient, peas, beans, lentils, just to see how people reacted. He also reportedly released snakes into the crowd at the circus for entertainment. And he enjoyed giving guests cushions filled with air so they would slowly deflate during the meal, lowering the diners to the floor. It was performance art, I guess. Basil I of Byzantium had his own odd origin story. He started life as a peasant, worked his way up through charm and skill, and eventually became emperor. But he was also deeply superstitious. He believed in omens, dreams, and prophecies, and would make decisions based on them. This was not unusual in Byzantium, where astrology was practically a second court language. Michael III, nicknamed the Drunkard, leaned into his reputation. He enjoyed chariot racing, parties, and practical jokes, like dressing up his friends as priests and staging fake ceremonies. He wasn't entirely incompetent, but his love of leisure over governance eventually led to his assassination by his co-emperor, Basil I, which, in fairness, is one way to end a party. And finally, Constantine XI, the last Byzantine emperor. By all accounts, he was brave, dutiful, and a little fatalistic. When the Ottomans besieged Constantinople in 1453, he refused to flee, even though escape was possible. On the final day, he is said to have stripped off his imperial regalia and charged into the fighting. No one ever found his body. It's a rare case of an emperor whose last act was dignified, though given the 1,000 years of imperial drama before him, it almost feels out of character. So, from dice-playing administrators to snake-releasing teenagers, the emperors of Rome and Byzantium were as varied as they were unpredictable. Some were brilliant, some were disastrous, and some were just odd. But all of them left behind stories that centuries later still keep us awake, or, in our case, gently lull us to sleep. Scandals, feuds, and family drama. If there's one thing Roman and Byzantine history teaches us, it's that the phrase, "keep it in the family," was taken far too literally. Dynasties were built on marriages, alliances, and bloodlines, and often destroyed by the exact same things. Let's start with the Julio-Claudian dynasty, because they practically wrote the script for imperial dysfunction. Augustus, the first emperor, was a master of image control. He presented himself as a moral, family-oriented leader, while quietly exiling his own daughter, Julia.
for what was politely called immorality. Translation: she had a lively social life that didn't fit the official narrative. She spent the rest of her days on a remote island, which was basically the Roman version of being unfollowed by everyone you know. Then came Tiberius, Augustus's stepson, who had a famously frosty relationship with his mother, Livia. Livia was a political powerhouse in her own right, and ancient gossip claims she may have helped along the deaths of several potential heirs to secure the throne for Tiberius. Whether that's true or not, the fact that people believed it tells you everything about her reputation. Tiberius himself eventually abandoned Rome for Capri, leaving the city to stew in rumors about what he was doing there. Spoiler, the rumors were not flattering. Caligula took family drama to new heights, or depths. He adored his three sisters, especially Drusilla, to the point where ancient sources hint at an inappropriate closeness. When Drusilla died, Caligula ordered a period of public mourning, usually reserved for emperors. He also had a habit of humiliating senators by making them run alongside his chariot or watch him dance. It's safe to say the Senate was not sending him holiday cards. Claudius, Caligula's uncle, was pulled from behind a curtain and declared emperor after Caligula's assassination. Literally, he was considered a safe choice because people thought he was harmless, but his marriages were anything but harmless. His third wife, Messalina, was infamous for her affairs, including a rumored marriage to another man while Claudius was still alive. When he found out, she was executed. His fourth wife, Agrippina the Younger, was even more ambitious. She maneuvered her teenage son Nero into the line of succession and may have poisoned Claudius to speed things up. Nero repaid his mother's efforts by having her killed. Their relationship started strong. Agrippina was his closest advisor, but as Nero grew more independent and more paranoid, tensions rose. Eventually, he tried to have her drowned in a collapsible boat. When that failed, he sent assassins. It's the kind of mother-son dynamic that makes you grateful for awkward family dinners. Fast forward a bit, and we get to the Severan dynasty, where family feuds were practically a sport. Severus Severus, the founder, had two sons, Caracalla and Geta. He told them on his deathbed to be harmonious, enrich the soldiers, and scorn everyone else. They managed the last two, but not the first. Within months, Caracalla had Geta martyred, in his mother's arms no less. He then ordered Geta's name erased from inscriptions and his image removed from portraits. It was the Roman version of unfriending someone so thoroughly they no longer exist in your photo albums. The Byzantines, of course, took family intrigue to operatic levels. Take Irene of Athens, who ruled as empress in her own right in the late 8th century. She was regent for her young son, Constantine VI, but when he tried to take full control, she had him blinded in the same palace where he grew up. She then ruled alone, becoming the first woman to do so in Byzantine history. It's not exactly a heartwarming mother-son story, but it did make her unforgettable. Then there's Andronikos I Komnenos, a 12th century emperor who was charming, handsome, and utterly ruthless. He seduced the widowed empress, married her, and took the throne. At first, he was popular for cracking down on corruption, but paranoia set in, and he began executing anyone he suspected of plotting against him, which in Constantinople was basically everyone. His reign ended when an angry mob tore him apart in the streets. Not the most restful exit. And we can't forget the Palaiologos dynasty, the last Byzantine rulers. By the 15th century, the empire was a fraction of its former size, but the family still found time for squabbles over succession. Brothers fought brothers, nephews plotted against uncles, and all the while, the Ottomans were closing in. It's almost impressive how much energy they devoted to internal drama, while the walls were literally shaking from cannon fire. In the end, the Roman and Byzantine empires weren't just brought down by external enemies. They were often weakened from within by ambition, jealousy, and the kind of family politics that make modern soap operas look tame. And maybe that's why their stories still fascinate us, because beneath the crowns, the palaces, and the marble statues, they were just people, flawed, petty, and endlessly complicated. A day in the life of ordinary Romans. Picture it. The sun is just rising over the tiled rooftops of Rome. The air smells faintly of baking bread, wood smoke, and, let's be honest, the open sewer that ran down the middle of many streets. Rome was magnificent, yes, but it was also noisy, crowded, and not exactly fragrant. If you were a wealthy patrician, your day might start in a spacious domus, a townhouse with an open-air atrium, mosaic floors, and maybe a fountain burbling in the center. If you were part of the urban poor, you probably lived in an insula, a multi-story apartment block made of wood and brick, with thin walls, no plumbing, and a tendency to catch fire at inconvenient times. The ground floor might have shops or taverns. The upper floors were cheaper and less safe. So yes, penthouse living was not a thing here. Breakfast, or ientaculum, was simple. Bread, maybe dipped in wine with a bit of cheese or fruit if you were lucky. Romans didn't do elaborate morning meals. That was for later in the day. Street vendors sold hot chickpea porridge, honey cakes, and watered wine to people on the go. Coffee didn't exist yet, so if you needed a morning pick-me-up, you just had to power through on sheer willpower and carbs. The streets themselves were a constant performance, merchants shouting about their wares, beggars asking for coins, children darting between carts, and the occasional goat wandering loose. Carts and wagons weren't allowed in the city during daylight hours, so deliveries happened at night, meaning if you lived near a main road, you got the soothing sound of iron wheels on cobblestones as your lullaby. Public fountains dotted the city, fed by aqueducts that brought fresh water from miles away. People filled clay jars here, gossiping while they waited their turn. Water was free, but if you wanted a private supply piped into your home, you had to pay and bribe the right officials. Bathhouses were a big part of daily life. Even the poorest Romans could afford the small fee to enter, and for many, it was the social hub of the day. You'd strip down, store your clothes with an attendant, and move through a series of rooms. The warm room, tepidarium, the hot room, caldarium, and the cold plunge, frigidarium. There were massages, hair plucking, yes, even for men, and plenty of political gossip. If you wanted to know what was really going on in the city, you didn't go to the Senate, you went to the baths. Lunch, or prandium, was light, maybe leftovers from the night before, bread with olives, or cold meat. The main meal, cena, came later in the afternoon or evening. For the wealthy, this could be a multi-course affair with exotic dishes, roast dormice, honey-glazed ham, oysters from distant coasts. For the poor, it was more likely lentils, bread, and whatever vegetables were in season. Meat was expensive, so it wasn't a daily staple unless you were rich or worked in a kitchen and accidentally dropped things into your own bag. Entertainment was everywhere. The Colosseum hosted gladiator games, animal hunts, and public executions, all free to attend, courtesy of the emperor's bread and circuses policy. The Circus Maximus held chariot races that could draw hundreds of thousands of spectators. Theaters staged comedies, tragedies, and mimes, the latter being less silent than you'd think, and often full of crude jokes. And then there were the taverns. Wine was the drink of choice, but it was usually watered down. Drinking it straight was considered barbaric, which didn't stop plenty of people from doing it anyway. Taverns were noisy, smoky, and sometimes doubled as gambling dens or brothels. They were also where you went if you wanted to hear the latest rumors or start one. Religion was woven into daily life. Households had small shrines to the lares and penates, guardian spirits of the home and pantry. Public festivals filled the calendar, honoring gods like Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. These were as much about feasting and games as they were about piety. If you were a merchant, you might make an offering to Mercury for good business. If you were a soldier, you'd pray to Mars before a campaign. The workday varied depending on your trade. Artisans worked in small workshops, their tools and goods spilling out into the street. Merchants haggled in the markets. Laborers hauled goods at the docks or worked on construction sites. Slaves did, well, everything, from cooking and cleaning to tutoring children and managing estates. Some were treated decently, others were not. Freedom was possible. Manumission was common enough that freed men formed a significant part of the population, but it wasn't guaranteed. As evening fell, oil lamps flickered to life. The streets could be dangerous after dark, so most people stayed indoors unless they had business or trouble to attend to. Dinner conversations might drift from politics to gossip, to which neighbor's roof was leaking again. And somewhere in a quiet corner of the city, a scribe was scratching away at a wax tablet, recording the day's events, never knowing that centuries later, we'd be here, talking about them in the dark. Life in Rome wasn't all marble and glory. It was crowded, noisy, and often precarious. But it was also vibrant, communal, and endlessly inventive. And maybe that's why, even after the empire fell, the idea of Rome never really went away.
Foods, fashions, and luxuries of Rome. Let's start with the food, because if there's one thing Romans knew how to do, it was eat in style. Not every day, of course. Most people's meals were simple: bread, porridge, vegetables, maybe some cheese. But when the wealthy threw a dinner party, it was less meal and more culinary theater. The centerpiece of Roman flavor was garum, a fermented fish sauce that they poured on almost everything. Think of it as the ketchup of the ancient world, except it smelled like, well, fermented fish. It was made by layering fish guts and salt in vats and letting it sit in the sun until it turned into a liquid. Then they strained it and sold it in amphorae for a tidy profit. The best garum came from Spain, and it was so prized that amphorae were stamped with the maker's name, like a luxury brand. At elite banquets, the menu could be adventurous: stuffed dormice, roasted peacock, flamingo tongues, and exotic fruits shipped in from across the empire. Honey was the main sweetener, so desserts leaned heavily on it. Honey cakes, honeyed dates, honey-glazed everything. Wine flowed freely, but it was almost always watered down. Drinking it straight was considered uncivilized, which didn't stop certain emperors from doing it anyway. Banquets weren't just about food, they were about status. Guests reclined on couches, propped on their left elbows, while slaves brought dish after dish. Entertainment might include musicians, poets, or even a dramatic reading of the host's latest work, which you were expected to praise, no matter how bad it was. Now, fashion. Roman clothing was all about signaling who you were without saying a word. The basic garment for men was the tunic, knee-length for everyday wear, longer for formal occasions. Over that, citizens could wear a toga, which was essentially a massive wool sheet draped in a very specific way. It looked impressive, but it was heavy, hot, and required practice to wear without tripping. There were different types: the plain white toga virilis for adult male citizens, the purple-bordered toga praetexta for magistrates, and the all-purple toga picta for victorious generals and emperors. Women wore the stola, a long dress often belted at the waist, with a palla, a shawl, draped over the shoulders. Jewelry was a big deal: gold, silver, gemstones, and pearls imported from as far as India. Hairstyles changed with the trends, from simple buns to elaborate curls piled high and decorated with pins. Some styles were so complex that wealthy women had slaves whose only job was hairdressing. Footwear was practical, but still varied. Sandals, soleae, were common, but there were also closed shoes for cooler weather. Soldiers wore sturdy hobnailed boots, while senators might opt for soft leather shoes dyed black. Color and decoration could signal rank, because in Rome, even your shoes were part of your resume. And then there were the little luxuries. Perfume was hugely popular, imported from Arabia, India, and beyond. It came in glass or alabaster bottles, and people used it liberally, on themselves, on their clothes, even on their pets. Cosmetics were common too. Women used lead-based face powder for a pale complexion, which, yes, was toxic, and rouge made from red ochre or crushed berries. Cocoa lined the eyes, and some even used burnt cork to darken their eyebrows. Furniture in wealthy homes could be surprisingly modern-looking. Couches with cushions, carved wooden tables, bronze lamps. Walls were painted with frescoes, landscapes, mythological scenes, or trompe-l'oeil designs to make rooms look bigger. Floors might be covered in intricate mosaics, sometimes with cheeky messages like "Beware of the dog" at the entrance. For public luxuries were just as important. Rome had hundreds of public baths, fountains, and markets. Aqueducts brought fresh water into the city, while sewers carried waste away, at least in theory. The Forum was the heart of public life, lined with temples, basilicas, and shops. If you wanted to see and be seen, you went to the Forum. For the truly wealthy, luxury extended to the countryside. They owned villae, country estates with vineyards, olive groves, and private baths. Some were working farms. Others were just for leisure, with landscaped gardens, fish ponds, and shaded colonnades. It was the Roman version of a weekend getaway, except your weekend could last for months if you had the right connections in the city. And of course, there were pets. Dogs were popular, both as companions and guards. Small lapdogs were especially fashionable among wealthy women. Birds, especially songbirds and parrots, were kept in cages. Some people even had pet monkeys because nothing says "I have money" like an animal that steals your jewelry and throws figs at your guests. In the end, Roman luxuries weren't just about comfort, they were about identity, status, and the performance of power. From the cut of your toga to the scent of your perfume, everything you wore, ate, or displayed told the world exactly where you stood in the social hierarchy. And in a city where politics and appearances were inseparable, that mattered as much as, if not more, than what you actually did. The Roman night. The sun has slipped behind the hills, and the last streaks of gold fade from the sky over the Tiber. Rome exhales. Shadows stretch across the Forum, the marble columns turning from white to a soft, sleepy gray. The heat of the day lingers in the stones, radiating gently into the cooling air. If you're in a wealthy domus, oil lamps are being lit one by one, their flames flickering against painted walls. Slaves move quietly through the rooms, drawing curtains, setting out the evening meal, and making sure the master's sandals are exactly where he'll want them in the morning. The atrium smells faintly of olive oil, beeswax, and the day's fading perfume. Out in the streets, the mood changes. By law, carts and wagons can now enter the city, so the night begins with the rumble of wooden wheels on cobblestones. It's not exactly peaceful. If you live above a busy street, you'll hear the clatter of deliveries, the shouts of drivers, and the occasional crash when someone misjudges a corner. Rome's soundtrack is never truly silent. The taverns are still open, their doorways spilling lamplight and laughter into the dark. Inside, men lean over rough wooden tables, cups of watered wine in hand, arguing about chariot teams or the latest scandal in the Senate. The air is thick with smoke from oil lamps and the smell of grilled fish. Somewhere in the corner, a musician plucks at a lyre, half-heartedly keeping time with the conversation. In the poorer districts, the night is less about leisure and more about survival. The insulae, those tall, crowded apartment blocks, are dimly lit, if at all. Families huddle around small lamps, eating simple suppers of bread and beans. Children doze on mats while their parents talk quietly, voices low so as not to disturb the neighbors through the paper-thin walls. From the street below, you might hear the bark of a stray dog or the soft splash of water being poured from a window. The smells of the city shift with the hour. The sharp tang of garum from the fishmongers fades, replaced by the warm scent of baking bread from the night ovens. Bakers work while the city sleeps, so that fresh loaves will be ready for the morning crowds. If you pass by one of these bakeries, the air is thick with the smell of yeast and flour, a small comfort in a city that can be as harsh as it is grand. The Forum, so noisy by day, becomes almost eerie at night. The statues stand in silence, their faces pale in the moonlight. A few night watchmen patrol with torches, their footsteps echoing off the paving stones. They're there to keep order, but also to make sure no one decides to help themselves to the bronze fittings on the temples. Rome is proud, but it's also practical, and bronze is valuable. In the Suburra, the city's most infamous neighborhood, the night is just getting started. This is where the taverns are rowdier, the gambling dens busier, and the brothels lit with red lamps. The streets are narrow, the air heavy with smoke and perfume, and the laughter here is sharper, edged with the knowledge that the watchmen don't come down this way unless they have to. Deals are made in whispers, dice clatter on wooden boards, and somewhere a fight breaks out over a spilled drink. If you're lucky enough to be in the countryside, the Roman night is different entirely. The villas are quiet, the only sounds the chirp of crickets and the rustle of olive trees in the breeze. The sky is darker here, the stars brighter. Inside, the household settles early, the rhythms of farm life don't allow for late nights. But even here, the empire is present. The roads, the coins, the laws that reach from the city to the farthest fields. Back in the city, the Palatine Hill glows softly with lamplight from the imperial palace. Somewhere inside, an emperor, whether wise, foolish, or somewhere in between, is finishing his evening meal. Perhaps he's dictating letters to be sent at dawn, or listening to a poet recite verses about his latest victory.
Or maybe he's just staring into the dark, wondering how long his reign will last. Even emperors have their quiet moments. As the night deepens, the city's energy fades. The taverns close, the streets empty, and the last carts rattle away. The watchmen make their rounds, their torches bobbing in the dark. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then falls silent. The Tiber flows on, black and slow, carrying the day's dust and secrets toward the sea. Rome sleeps, lightly, restlessly, always ready to wake, because in a city like this, tomorrow will bring more noise, more deals, more gossip, and more history to be made. And for now, in the soft hours before dawn, the Empire is just a collection of breathing rooms, flickering lamps, and dreams. The long shadow of Rome. So here we are. The streets are quiet now, not just for the night, but forever. The Colosseum still stands, but its roar is gone. The Senate House is empty, its marble benches cold. The aqueducts still stretch across the hills, but the water no longer runs. Rome, as an empire, is over. But Rome, as an idea, never really left. It's strange, isn't it? A city that began as a cluster of huts on a riverbank ended up shaping the laws, languages, and architecture of half the world. Even now, in places far from Italy, you can walk under arches built in the Roman style, read words rooted in Latin, and follow roads that trace the lines of Roman engineering. The empire may have fallen, but its fingerprints are everywhere. The Romans themselves probably didn't think much about legacy. They were too busy with the day-to-day, collecting taxes, building baths, arguing in the forum, or trying to avoid being stabbed in the next round of political purges. But in their relentless expansion, their obsession with order, and their love of spectacle, they left behind a blueprint for power that others have copied ever since. And yet, for all the grandeur, Rome was never just marble and triumphs. It was also cramped apartments, smoky kitchens, and streets that smelled of bread and sewage in equal measure. It was mothers hargling in the market, children chasing each other through alleys, and old men telling exaggerated war stories in the baths. It was human, messy, contradictory, and alive. When we talk about the fall of Rome, it's tempting to imagine a single dramatic moment, a crash, a collapse, a curtain dropping on history. But really, it was a slow fade. Borders shifted, armies thinned, trade routes frayed. The empire didn't so much explode as it exhaled and didn't inhale again. And in the spaces it left behind, new kingdoms, new languages, and new stories grew. The Byzantines kept the Roman name alive for 1,000 years after the West fell. But even they eventually gave way. And yet the idea of Rome, the dream of a unified, ordered, powerful state, kept resurfacing. Medieval kings called themselves Caesar in their own languages. Renaissance artists filled their canvases with Roman gods and heroes. Even modern capitals borrow the look of Roman temples for their government buildings, as if a few columns might lend them the same authority. Maybe that's the real trick of Rome. Not the legions, not the marble, not even the emperors, but the story of a place that rose from nothing, ruled the known world, and then slipped into memory without ever really leaving it. It's a story that can be retold in 100 ways, each time with a little more polish, a little more myth, and a little less of the messy truth. And here, in the quiet of our own night, we can let that story rest. We've walked with shepherds on the Palatine Hill, sat in the Senate's shadow, reclined at banquets, and wandered the streets after dark. We've met emperors who were brilliant, foolish, cruel, or just plain odd. We've seen the empire at its height and at its most fragile. Now the lamps are out. The city sleeps, not the restless sleep of a place waiting for dawn, but the deep, still sleep of history. The Tiber still flows, but it carries only reflections now. In somewhere, in the ruins, a fragment of mosaic catches the moonlight, holding on to its color for just a little longer. Rome is gone, but Rome is also everywhere.
And maybe that's the only kind of immortality any empire can hope for.